For 3 centuries, the Galactic Compact had congratulated itself on stability. Trade routes were fixed, borders logged, and every vessel that crossed interstellar distance carried a code, a registry, and a sanction stamp. Order was not maintained by endless war, but by layers of treaties, inspection schedules, and enforcement fleets that almost never fired their weapons. The galaxy believed it had grown up, leaving chaos behind. Civilized species told themselves unpredictability had been solved. Conflicts were scheduled into arbitration cycles. Disputes were reduced to filings and countersignatures. Even violence had forms and limits, contained inside clauses and response tables. Anything truly unaccounted for was considered a relic of primitive eras, not a present concern. On the star charts, human space existed only as a sealed volume, restricted, silent, uninviting. It was listed as non-participatory and strategically irrelevant. No trade lanes passed through it. No patrols lingered near it. Analysts stopped studying it generations ago. Nothing had entered. Nothing had exited. Humanity was treated as a closed equation, deep inside an Imperial monitoring hub, a routine. Scan updated its displays. Millions of data points refreshed without incident. Then one line refused classification. No registry code attached. No transponder signature. No compact authorization tag. It was not a ghost echo. It was not sensor. Noise. Cross-checks confirmed it. A ship was moving through regulated space dock. Technicians assumed delay, then error. Systems were recalibrated. The contact remained. Its vector was clean. Its mass was real. Its course ignored approved lanes entirely. Automated alerts escalated upward, quiet but insistent. According to every rule the galaxy lived by, this contact should not exist. According to every system designed to prevent surprise, it should have been impossible, yet it was there, and it was moving. The monitoring hub remained calm as protocols unfolded. Notifications climbed channels built for boredom, not alarm. Supervisors reviewed screens with practiced detachment, confident that procedure would resolve everything. No alarm sounded. No weapons armed. Order had always corrected itself before. The compact had never faced a problem it could not log, classify, and contain. That confidence held, even as the unlogged ship advanced one measured unit at a time, steady, silent, and entirely unconcerned with belief. By the time doubt surfaced, the systems designed to prevent surprise had already failed, and no one yet understood what that failure would demand. The galaxy was about to relearn uncertainty. The lesson began. The first reaction inside Imperial Command was not fear, but irritation. Analysts reviewed the contact again and again, convinced it was a malfunction or an unlicensed courier trying to exploit outdated navigation corridors. Such things happened at the margins. They were corrected, fined, and forgotten. This would be no different. When trajectory data finalized, irritation became confusion. The ship's point of origin resolved inside a sealed volume of space marked human-controlled. That fact alone should have explained nothing, yet it unsettled the room. Humanity did not do this. Humanity did not leave its borders. For generations, humans had been labeled isolationist and strategically irrelevant. They did not attend councils. They did not contribute fleets. They did not interfere. Their silence was logged as compliance. Their absence was interpreted as weakness. Historical assessments described them as emotionally volatile but technologically ordinary, dangerous mostly to themselves and no one else. Imperial officers shifted into routine response mode. A formal warning broadcast was drafted, precise and patient. Violation codes were attached. Fines were calculated before transmission. No intercept fleet was requested. That would be excessive, even embarrassing. This was a paperwork problem, not a security threat. The broadcast went out. The ship did not slow. Its velocity continued to rise in steady increments. clean and deliberate. Its vector ignored approved lanes entirely, cutting across regulated space without deviation. Secondary hails followed, then tertiary. There was no acknowledgement, no automated reply, no error ping. A junior officer adjusted sensor overlays and hesitated before speaking. The ship was not avoiding patrol clusters. It was passing through them, threading between overlapping detection fields with narrow margins that suggested calculation, not chance. Each transit was exact. Each gap was chosen. Supervisors reviewed the data and dismissed the concern. Pattern. Recognition could invent intent where none existed. One unregistered human vessel could not destabilize an empire. Rules governed space. Compliance was inevitable. Humans, like everyone else, would learn to obey. Confidence remained intact, even as uncertainty crept closer. The assumption held that the ship was lost, reckless, or confused. No one yet considered the alternative. The vessel maintained course. It did not wander. It did not hesitate. It was not reacting to the galaxy around it. It was moving with purpose. The coast did not hesitate. It was not reacting to the galaxy around it. It was moving with it. It was moving with purpose. Truth did not surface through military channels or command alerts. It leaked into the open through civilian noise, weak and broken, slipping past filters not meant to hear it. A fragmented distress signal spilled across public frequencies, scrambled and fading, never intended for imperial ears. Within the distortion were refugee transport markers, civilian identifiers, and the unmistakable biosign patterns of children. The signal traced back to the edge of imperial space, to a compact sanctioned resource compliance operation. On record, it was lawful population relocation, approved and indexed, a corrective measure after a failed colonial venture. Entire communities were being moved to satisfy labor deficits elsewhere. Nothing about it violated compact law. In practice, families were being taken apart. Homes were emptied under escort. Transports were filled beyond design limits. The distressed voices in the signal were not asking for rescue. They were asking for time, for clarity, for someone to acknowledge they were not cargo. The galaxy had accepted the system for generations. It was not called slavery. It was called rebalancing. The terminology was precise. The paperwork was flawless. Every life displaced was accounted for in neat columns and authorized signatures. Human monitoring. Arrays intercepted the same signal. They did not translate it into legal categories or compliance metrics. They did not reduce it to an acceptable loss calculation. They read it plainly as it was meant to be heard. Civilians under duress. Lives being broken under authorities. Seal. There was no broadcast debate. No emergency council session. No request for exemption. Inside human space, response thresholds were crossed without ceremony. Protocols shifted quietly. Long dormant frameworks activated, not designed for conquest or war, but for intervention. Commands propagated without speeches or justification. Systems that had not been powered in decades came online with measured restraint. Safeguards engaged, not to escalate violence, but to prevent hesitation. Responsibility was assumed, not assigned. Observers beyond human borders noticed nothing at first. No declarations were issued. No warnings followed. Space remained calm, governed, and unaware. Even as a decision solidified beyond its jurisdiction, that decision did not carry anger or urgency. It carried weight. It carried memory. It carried the certainty that once civilians were reduced to resources, delay became complicity. Inaction would not be neutral. Waiting would multiply harm. The human ship already moving through regulated space did not alter course. It did not slow to reassess. Its engines drew deeper power and its velocity increased with smooth certainty. Course parameters tightened. Margins closed. Across human space, silence followed the decision, heavy and final. The kind that preceded movement rather than debate. The moral line had been crossed, not by human action, but by a system that mistook legality for justice. The galaxy did not yet understand that difference, or what it demanded in return from them soon, and consequences were already accelerating beyond anyone's expectations. Now everywhere, simultaneously, Imperial Command no longer treated the anomaly as clerical noise. Status flags shifted, and the unregistered contact was elevated to a formal security concern. Authority moved slowly, but it moved. A structured demand was issued through standard channels, encoded with priority markers and legal weight. The human vessel was ordered to halt, identify itself, and submit to inspection under compact navigation law. There was no response. The demand was repeated with greater emphasis. Penalties were attached. Enforcement clauses followed. Space remained silent. What no sensor recorded and no intelligence service detected was the absence of debate aboard the human ship. There were no raised voices, no competing interpretations, no last-moment uncertainty. The decision had already been made before the first Imperial demand was sent. Not by politicians and not by admirals, but by doctrine written after humanity's own darkest centuries. Civilians were not negotiable. That principle required no confirmation. Human rules did not require permission to prevent harm. They required responsibility, and responsibility had been accepted. Mid-flight, the ship altered its internal configuration. Power distribution shifted across systems in patterns unfamiliar to compact observers. Heat signatures changed. Mass ratios adjusted. No weapon ports opened. No shields flared. No threat was announced. The vessel simply stopped behaving in ways the galaxy expected it to. For the first time in generations, a compact order was ignored. It was not challenged. It was not protested. It was not even acknowledged. It was rendered irrelevant by motion alone. Imperial commanders hesitated. Protocol discouraged firing first, especially against a vessel that had not attacked. To stand down, however, felt like surrender. They debated escalation paths designed to force compliance without admitting loss of control. They believed pressure would work. Authority always had. They believed the human ship would retreat when confronted with formal power, legal consequence, and numerical superiority. That assumption shaped every calculation that followed. What they did not understand was the difference between restraint and obedience. Humans had practiced restraint for generations by choice. They had learned the cost of impulsive action and had written limits into themselves. But restraint was not submission. As the human vessel continued forward, steady and unchanged, Imperial Command remained convinced the situation was still recoverable. They believed they were still in control of events. They were wrong, but they would not realize it until retreat was no longer an option, and permission no longer mattered to anyone. Silence stretched as systems tracked the ship's advance, each update stripping confidence away. Orders queued but remained unsent. Weapons stayed cold. Authority hesitated again. Somewhere inside Imperial Command, certainty cracked. The realization formed too slowly to stop what followed. Control was not slipping. It was already gone, carried forward by a vessel that did not slow, did not answer, and did not intend to turn back. The consequences were imminent, unavoidable, and moving faster than any protocol allowed anymore. The patrol wing was deployed with calm efficiency. 5 ships detached from their stations and moved to intercept, a formation overwhelming by every regulatory metric. Their orders were clear and restrained: contain the vessel, force compliance, avoid damage. The human ship should slow. It should acknowledge authority. It should submit to inspection. It did neither. As distance closed, sensor officers prepared for evasive maneuvers or last-moment deceleration. Instead, space itself shifted, not violently, not with flaring energy or visible distortion. The change was subtle, exact, almost careful. Readings blurred, reference points slipped. The human ship did not turn aside or brake. It continued forward, and the space around it adjusted to allow passage. The vessel passed through the patrol formation. Sensors failed in cascading resets. Targeting solutions collapsed into noise. Guidance systems recalibrated themselves mid-flight, then shut down entirely. One patrol ship lost orientation and spun away, thrusters locked, hull intact but helpless. Another went dark, power systems offline, drifting silent and stable. No hulls were breached. No weapons discharged. No debris scattered across the void. There were no casualties. Silence followed, heavy and complete, broken only by emergency status pings struggling to re-establish order. The patrol commander reported what data remained, voice steady but disbelieving. They had not been fired upon. They had not been jammed in any recognized sense. They had not been engaged according to any definition in the manuals. They had been bypassed, cleanly and deliberately. The human vessel emerged from the formation. Without alteration, its course remained unchanged. Its velocity held steady. It did not look back. It did not signal success. It did not acknowledge the ships left behind. Command centers across the region received the report in fragments at first, then in full. Analysts replayed sensor logs frame by frame, searching for weapon signatures that were not there. Tactical officers reviewed engagement doctrine that offered no guidance. The encounter did not fit any category designed to measure threat. This was the moment. Fear began to spread, not because of destruction, not because of loss, but because of control demonstrated without force. The galaxy understood firepower. It understood shields, missiles, escalation tables, and proportional response. Those concepts had governed conflict for centuries. What it did not understand was a vessel that refused to play by those rules. The human ship had not fought. It had not warned. It had not dominated through superior numbers or visible strength. It had simply gone where it intended to go and rendered opposition irrelevant along the way. One ship against many. No aggression. No spectacle. Total dominance. As patrol vessels struggled to regain basic function, command realized too late that interception had already failed. The human ship was no longer approaching the contested zone. It was already past the last line meant to stop it. Fear spread outward through the networks, quiet but accelerating, as systems recalculated threat models that no longer applied. The realization followed close behind, sharp and unwelcome. If this was restraint, then escalation would not look like war. It would look like permission being removed entirely. News of the encounter spread outward through command networks and civilian channels alike. Reports were copied, forwarded, reanalyzed, and quietly escalated. Analysts abandoned familiar threat models and began building new ones from fragments. How did one deter a force that did not escalate traditionally? How did one threaten something that was not threatening you? Speculation filled the gap left by understanding. Some claimed the human ship was a prototype weapon, an experimental platform never meant to be seen. Others insisted it was a bluff, a singular anomaly that would fail under pressure. Emergency sessions convened across multiple sectors. Fleets were repositioned, not to fight, but to be ready, hovering just below engagement thresholds. Command language remained controlled, but uncertainty bled through every update. No doctrine addressed a vessel that bypassed opposition without combat. No regulation explained dominance without destruction. Every assumption about escalation relied on fear of loss, and the human ship had inflicted none. Beyond command centers, civilian populations noticed the hesitation. News summaries leaked, data visuals circulated. If the compact could not stop one unregistered vessel, what else had it misunderstood? What other certainties rested on procedure rather than capability? Questions multiplied faster than official reassurances. The human vessel entered the contested system without announcement. Surveillance arrays tracked it with growing tension. It did not target stations or enforcement ships. Instead, it inserted itself between extraction platforms and refugee transports. A single hull placed deliberately in the narrow corridors of movement. It positioned itself where any attack would endanger civilians first. Extraction schedules stalled. Enforcement captains hesitated, forced to calculate consequences they were not trained to accept. The human ship remained motionless for a moment, then adjusted its position again, correcting for drift, always between authority and those being moved. Still, it did not fire. No warning shots. No threats. No countdowns. The galaxy watched in unsettled silence. Power was being exercised without spectacle, without declaration, without the emotional cues that made conflict familiar. Observers struggled to categorize what they were seeing. It was not conquest. It was not deterrence. It was presence enforced by restraint. Fear spread not from explosions, but from implication. If one ship could halt an operation sanctioned by law simply by refusing to move, then law was no longer absolute. Control depended on something else, something unspoken. As fleets waited and councils argued, the human vessel held its position. It did not demand surrender. It did not negotiate terms. It did not explain itself. It simply stayed, and in that stillness, the galaxy felt the first real tremor of losing authority it had never believed could be questioned. Silence hardened into pressure as minutes passed without resolution. Sensors stayed fixed. Weapons remained idle. Every delay widened the space where precedent used to live. Somewhere inside the compact's vast machinery, confidence eroded one calculation at a time, replaced by the uneasy understanding that readiness no longer guaranteed control, and waiting no longer preserved order. That realization settled quietly across the system, heavy and unavoidable, while the human ship continued to wait, unmoving, forcing the galaxy to confront the cost of acting. And the greater enforcement fleets arrived with disciplined formation and restrained posture. Their captains expected resistance, perhaps escalation, perhaps finally the moment when the human ship would reveal weapons and justify force. What they encountered instead was absence. Communications collapsed first, not violently, but selectively. Orders delayed, confirmations failed. Fleet-wide coordination dissolved into isolated command bubbles. Targeting systems followed. Locks refused to hold. Solutions degraded into meaningless data. Weapons stayed armed, yet unusable, obedient to commands that never completed their cycle. Crews attempted manual overrides and found nothing broken, only inaccessible. Systems were intact and unreachable at the same time. Then extraction mechanisms began shutting down, one by one, not explosively. Not all at once. Precisely. Docking. Clamps released, conveyor fields disengaged. Transfer corridors depressurized safely and sealed. Slaver vessels reported cargo locks opening under their own safeguards, releasing civilian compartments without triggering alarms. Civilian transports regained control authority they had never been meant to access. Navigation restored, internal. Doors unlocked. Gravity stabilized. Life support surged above baseline, flooding compartments with clean air and steady pressure. Panic began to fade, replaced by confusion, then fragile hope. The human ship did not target vessels. It targeted outcomes. Infrastructure remained standing. Hulls remained intact. Power grids continued to function. Yet every result the operation required was being systematically removed. Extraction schedules failed. Compliance metrics collapsed. Authority dissolved into stalled procedures and unanswered commands. Imperial captains shouted orders that went nowhere. Threats were issued into silent channels. Some attempted weapons discharge and found firing solutions denied, not jammed, simply unavailable. There was no enemy to strike, no defensive wall to breach, only systems quietly refusing to serve them. Across The operational grid, human actions unfolded with unnerving restraint. Each intervention was clean, each change reversible. No line was crossed that could not be undone later, except one. Control was gone. Captains began to understand too late. The human ship was not fighting them. It was dismantling their operation while leaving them alive to witness it. It was removing their ability to harm without granting them the clarity of combat. This was not war. There were no fronts, no exchanges, no victories declared. It was correction applied in real time, enforced by a power that did not need permission and did not seek applause. Extraction fleets drifted powerless as civilians were freed around them. Authority remained present in name only, reduced to observers of their own failure. Every attempt to escalate produced nothing to push against. Fear sharpened as realization spread. If this was possible, then resistance was irrelevant. Strength meant nothing when outcomes could be rewritten without destruction. The human ship adjusted position once more, calmly, deliberately, ensuring no system could resume operation without exposing civilians to harm. Its presence forced paralysis. Every second it remained active stripped another assumption from imperial doctrine. Command centers watched data feeds flatten. Progress halted. Metrics failed. The operation ceased without a surrender, without a battle, without a single shot. Fired. And in that silence, captains finally understood the truth that chilled them deeper than any weapon. Humanity had not come to win. It had come to stop something. And stopping it did not require permission, negotiation, or destruction. It required only the will to accept responsibility, and the capability to enforce it completely. As enforcement. Fleets sat disabled and intact, stripped of purpose. The galaxy felt something new take hold. Not defeat, but exposure. The realization that power could be exercised without violence, and that such power left no room for argument. Correction was complete. What came next would not depend on who fired first, but on who dared act at all. Fear did not announce itself loudly. It settled into councils and command halls as a quiet urgency, the kind that forced decisions before anyone was ready. The compact understood precedent better than any enemy. What the human ship represented was not a military threat, but a fracture. If one actor could ignore procedure for moral reasons and succeed, then the system itself became optional. Emergency sessions were called across sectors. Delegates spoke in controlled tones about stability, continuity, and containment. The language avoided punishment. This was not retaliation. It was preservation. The idea that rules could be set aside, even for civilians, was treated as a contagion that had to be stopped before it spread. An emergency coalition was authorized. Fleets that had never trained together were assigned shared command protocols. Jurisdictional boundaries blurred. Rival powers aligned without ceremony, bound by a common fear rather than trust. The galaxy moved not with anger, but with resolve sharpened by panic. Command structures unified. Data streams merged. Engagement. Authorities were elevated. Every step followed law, because the purpose was to prove that law still mattered. The human ship was designated a destabilizing entity, not an enemy. A distinction meant to justify action without admitting vulnerability. Across staging systems, fleets gathered in numbers not seen outside full wars. Carriers, interdiction vessels, and enforcement cruisers took positions, forming layered nets designed to remove escape, isolate the target, and force compliance through overwhelming presence. No declarations were broadcast. No ultimatums issued. The coalition believed restraint would underscore legitimacy. Authority would speak through mass alone. Throughout it all, the human ship remained silent. It did not maneuver to evade. It did not reposition to threaten. It remained where it was, between civilians and harm, as if unaware of the attention converging upon it. Surveillance tracked it constantly, noting no visible changes. No preparation for battle. This calm was misread as limitation. Strategists assumed humans would not risk annihilation for principle. Models predicted eventual withdrawal once surrounded. Escalation tables assumed fear would apply pressure where force had not yet been used. They did not account for a different calculation. Human doctrine did not measure acceptable risk the same way. Loss was not the defining variable. Failure was. If retreat allowed harm to resume, then retreat was not an option. If compliance restored injustice, then compliance had no value. The coalition assembled with confidence built on numbers, convinced that inevitability was on their side. They believed that once faced with unified authority, humanity would choose survival over defiance. What they failed to grasp was simple. Humans did not measure survival by remaining intact. They measured it by ensuring others did. As fleets completed their formations and command nodes synchronized, the galaxy prepared to enforce order against a single ship. The machinery of power aligned perfectly, ready to move. And in doing so, it committed to a confrontation where acceptable risk had already been redefined beyond its understanding. The decision locked in with procedural finality. Once issued, it could not be withdrawn without admitting weakness, and no leader was willing to be first. Momentum replaced caution. Timetables advanced. Engagement windows were defined, not to destroy, but to compel. In every model, humanity was assumed to blink. None of them modeled what happened if it did not. The coalition mistook silence for hesitation, and stillness for fear. They mistook restraint for limit. In doing so, they stepped forward believing risk belonged only to the smaller force, never questioning what humanity had already decided was worth losing. That misunderstanding would define everything that followed, and none of them could undo it. The coalition moved with precision, born of confidence. Fleets closed in from layered vectors, interlocking formations tightening, until the human vessel sat at the center of an impossible geometry. Interdiction fields stabilized, escape corridors vanished, fire control networks synchronized across thousands of hulls. By every accepted standard, the trap was perfect. For the first time since entering regulated space, the human ship responded. It did not charge weapons. It did not maneuver. It did not issue demands. A broadcast unfolded across coalition channels, injected directly into command systems before filters could block it. It carried no threat markers, no escalation codes. It did not even identify its source. It carried data. Records streamed first. Archival files pulled from compact databases long assumed secure. Compliance reports, relocation authorizations, casualty adjustments quietly revised after audits. Footage followed, unedited and timestamped, showing enforcement actions from perspectives never meant to be shared. Families separated under escort. Civilian habitats cleared under lawful notice. Children cataloged by capacity, not by name. Then projections appeared. Clean, unemotional models calculating loss over time if current practices continued. Mortality curves. Psychological collapse indices. Cultural extinction timelines rendered in simple, unavoidable lines. Every fleet commander received the same feed simultaneously. No one could claim ignorance. No one could deny authenticity. Verification tags embedded themselves. Before denial protocols could engage. The broadcast did not accuse. It documented. Silence spread through command decks as officers watched authority stripped of abstraction. What had been policy became consequence. What had been lawful became visible. The weight of it settled unevenly, cracking composure in ways combat never did. Then the human ship acted. There was no visible discharge. No energy surge. No warning signature. Across the coalition, systems failed in unison. Power grids dropped to emergency reserves and stopped there. Weapons cycled once and locked cold, safeties engaged by their own internal governors. Fire control solutions vanished. Manual overrides returned nothing. Ships remained intact. Hull integrity held. Life support continued. Crews were unharmed. They were also completely unable to fire. Commanders issued orders that could not execute. Signals traveled and died inside their own ships. Coordination collapsed into isolated awareness. Thousands of vessels, built for domination, sat helpless and exposed. The realization hit hard and uneven. Humanity had not overwhelmed defenses. It had bypassed the need to. Every system designed to inflict harm had been denied its purpose without being destroyed. The coalition still existed. It simply could not act. The message was unmistakable. Humanity could have destroyed them. It chose not to. The human ship remained. Motionless at the center of the formation, small against the mass surrounding it, untouched by the paralysis it had imposed. It did not press advantage. It did not advance. It did not retreat. It waited. Commanders scanned their systems again and again, hoping for error, for recovery, for some missed lever. Nothing responded. The lockouts were total and elegantly enforced. No damage to repair, no sabotage to reverse. Just authority removed, across. The coalition, fear shifted shape. This was not defeat in battle, it was exposure. The understanding that survival had been granted deliberately, and could be withdrawn just as easily. The broadcast continued to loop quietly in the background. Records and projections repeating until they could no longer be ignored. The evidence did not end. It accumulated, layer upon layer, forcing every observer to confront the scale of what had been normalized. No further action came from the human vessel. No ultimatum followed. No demand for surrender. Its restraint became the final statement. By disabling fleets without destroying them, humanity stripped away justification. Any further escalation would be a choice made with full awareness, broadcast and recorded. The coalition could still fire if systems were restored, but doing so would no longer be enforcement. It would be violence without cover. That was the trap. Not encirclement, but clarity. Coalition command understood it too late. They had gathered to enforce order and found themselves unable to act without exposing the cost of doing so. Their power depended on the illusion of inevitability, and that illusion had been broken in front of everyone. The human ship did not need to threaten. It had already demonstrated capability beyond dispute. What remained was decision, and that decision no longer belonged solely to authority. Silence stretched across thousands of ships, heavy with understanding. Humanity had not come to conquer the galaxy, had come to show it what restraint looked like when backed by absolute capability. And in that moment, surrounded and helpless, the coalition grasped the most unsettling truth of all. This had never been a battle. They could win. The galaxy reeled in the quiet aftermath. Civilians were returned to their homes, and transports reversed course under restored control. Extraction platforms powered down, and compliance operations were suspended without ceremony. No victory announcements followed, and no celebrations were broadcast. The system simply stopped doing what it had been doing. Treaties were not rewritten, and charters were not amended. None were required. Authority recalculated itself around an absence it could no longer ignore. Across multiple systems, refugee ships arrived escorted only by silence. Records updated quietly, and errors were corrected without explanation. In human space, one final transmission was prepared and released unencrypted. It carried no demands, and requested no acknowledgement. It was delivered to every compact channel simultaneously. The message was short and precise. Human space is sovereign. Human civilians are non-negotiable. Interference will be met with response, not negotiation. There were no threats attached and no timelines given. This was not a declaration of war. It was a boundary. The effect was immediate and profound. Fleet movements slowed, and coalition formations dissolved without incident. Respect replaced condescension. In quiet assessments, For the first time, humanity was no longer described as unpredictable. It was described as principled. That distinction unsettled the galaxy more than open hostility ever could. Chaos could be dismissed and feared. Principle backed by capability demanded respect and caution. Human space remained closed, but no longer ignored. Observers understood now that silence did not mean passivity. It meant decision had already been made. The galaxy adjusted its behavior. Accordingly, borders were respected without protest and corridors were rerouted away from human volume. Civilians across multiple species slept more safely because of a line that had been drawn. No one celebrated it. No one challenged it. Everyone remembered it. Because the message carried an unspoken addition, the galaxy understood clearly. Humanity had demonstrated restraint once. It would not need to do so again. The future did not feel safer, but it felt defined. That certainty changed everything. Empires endured because of predictability, and humanity had just rewritten what predictable meant. The lesson lingered. When humans acted, they acted for others, not themselves. That made them dangerous in ways fleets could not measure. The galaxy watched human space from a respectful distance. No probes crossed its boundary. No patrols drifted too close. Everyone understood the cost of forgetting. The message had been simple, and simplicity made it permanent. Humanity did not seek control of the galaxy. It sought to control one thing only: what happened to civilians. Anything that threatened that would be answered. The galaxy believed them. Not because of fear alone, but because of what had already been shown. Respect settled where dominance once lived. And beyond the boundary, far from human space, something else stirred. Not a threat, but an awareness that the future would not forgive ignorance. The galaxy would remember this moment forever.